Welcome back to another video, guys, and we want to talk about Marvel stepping in it once again with something that they are very notorious for, and it is not finishing their screenplays before they start shooting their movies. And they are apparently doing this again with Avengers Doomsday. Now, if you've been following Marvel films at all in the last couple of years, you'll know better than anybody that the quality has not been there. It's been very hit and miss. Now, while I tend to enjoy most of the stuff that they put out, I don't watch any of the Marvel Plus shows, so I can't speak to those, but they don't look very good. Their features have seen better days, and there's been a lot of finger pointing, but one thing that seems to stick out to at least James Gunn is the fact that they don't finish their scripts before they start shooting. He believes that's why they are lacking. So we're going to check out this video from Stage Runner. This is a very knowledgeable, in-the-know guy. He's on TikTok and you can find him on Instagram, and he also goes by Pop Culture Brain here on Instagram. Let's see what he's got to say.
Marvel is doing exactly what James Gunn warned against back in June, and absolutely no one could have seen this coming. Fantastic Four is now in theaters, but Disney and Marvel are already shooting the next big MCU adventure. Avengers Doomsday is currently in production at Pinewood Studios in England, and as we learned from all those chairs, it's going to include returning X-Men actors, including Rebecca Romijn, who plays Mystique. And so
one thing that I don't understand about Marvel is they spent so much money to buy out 20th Century Fox to take control of these Marvel IPs, but they keep going back to what 20th Century Fox did. I don't really understand it. I was one that really enjoyed what 20th Century Fox was doing with their Marvel IPs before Disney bought them out. They were reinventing the X-Men, bringing in a new generation of actors to make them younger. The stories I felt were better. They were darker and more dramatic, especially when it got to movies like Logan, of course, and Dark Phoenix, which I will die on a hill and say that is one of the best X-Men movies that has ever been produced. I don't care what you have to say. I really would have loved to have seen where they could have gone with that, but we'll never know. But now that Disney owns it all, I mean, we know that they want to reinvent everything. So why don't they just reinvent it? Why do they keep going back to Rebecca Romijn? No, I'm sorry, Rebecca Romijn, but I just don't feel like her version of the character is relevant anymore. Let's see what else he has to say.
a reporter recently asked Rebecca Romijn if she was done filming her Doomsday scenes. And she said, "I'm not quite sure. The script they haven't finished writing it. It's been very, very fun and we don't know yet. They keep everything very close to the vest." All right, let me repeat that. They haven't finished writing it. Now, this isn't surprising as this is Marvel's MO. Starting with Iron Man, the studio has always seen its scripts as loose blueprints. They shoot what's written and then they put together a rough cut and then they do reshoots to fix whatever story problems there are. But let me remind you what James Gunn told Rolling Stone in June. He said, "I do believe that the reason why the movie industry is dying is not because of people not wanting to see movies. It's not because of home screens getting so good. The number one reason is because people are making movies without a finished screenplay." Essentially, Gunn believes the script needs to be good enough before cameras start rolling. Avengers Doomsday has an anticipated release date of December 18th, 2026. Marvel...
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of things here. So it may sound bizarre for a huge multi-million-dollar movie to start shooting without a script, and I agree, it is a little weird. It's probably not best practice, but you got to realize that this is actually very common in Hollywood. It's very common for movies to begin shooting without finished screenplays, especially for big budget productions, and I'll tell you why. First, let's talk about independent cinema to kind of contrast Hollywood here for a second. Like, in a lot of independent films, the director is usually also the writer, and they usually have enough time, they have enough space to write a script that they are completely happy with before they go into production. It's just part of how they operate. They get all their ducks lined up, especially if it's a passion project. You can bet your bottom dollar that that director has everything sorted out before he starts shooting. Another reason why they do that is because in a lot of independent films, they are really constricted on time. They don't have as much time renting locations, paying for certain actors or access to things. They've got to make their movies on a very tight budget and with a very limited time. So they have to make sure that the script is in tip-top shape before they ever start shooting, because they need to know exactly when, where, how, and who every step of the way. Good examples of movies like that are Whiplash, Lady Bird, and the Banshees of Inisherin. Those movies went into production with very limited rewrites once they started shooting. Now, to contrast that with how big budget motion pictures are made, in large studio budget films, scripts are usually rewritten during shooting. And that happens for several reasons. One, because as the movies are being shot, the directors are usually getting a lot of studio notes. They're also doing test screenings with a lot of the footage that they get each day, which are called dailies. And because big budget motion pictures have a lot of investors and studios have a lot of things riding on their success, financially speaking, it's very important that studios run those test screenings to see how it's all going. If there's a problem with the scene, if something is not working the way that it should based on what it says in the script, maybe there's a lack of chemistry between the characters, or maybe a line is coming off cheesier than it should sound, they can make changes to the script while they're on set to improve that scene. Another reason why scripts are rewritten on set is because of actor input. It's one thing when a writer locks himself into a room and writes an entire screenplay of 120 or so pages. But when it gets in the hands of the people that actually have to perform those roles, those actors have ideas. Those ideas will either help the film, or if a director is not interested, he can use his discretion and say no thanks. But in any case, making especially big movies like this, like Avengers, it's going to have the input of a lot of people, not just the director, but also the producer, other actors, and whatnot. Another thing that happens on big film sets are set and location changes. These types of movies are shot anywhere between a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and it involves renting out a lot of locations and spaces. Sometimes those agreements fall through. So a set may need to move from one location to another. It may have to move from one state to another, maybe for financial reasons too, or for legalities that come up or that crop up during a production that they can't foresee ahead of time. When we're talking about big action films, they focus more on pre-visualized action sequences, or what we call set pieces, which is the spectacle of the movie. That is where a lot of focus is at the beginning of production. Dialogue and character arcs and things like that, those get filled in or reworked during production, and sometimes even in post. After they finish shooting, they often find a lot of scenes, they say, as they're editing it. Marvel films are especially guilty of this. They often find the scenes a lot in post-edit or in the reshoots. We always hear about big budget movies going into reshoots after principal photography is finished, and this is why, because they're trying to make accommodations to create or what they think is going to be a stronger film by adding in some additional scenes or shooting things alternatively. Why does this happen? Time pressure. Release dates are often set before a script is ready. So in order to speed things along, sometimes they have to make changes to the script, take things that are very complex and maybe whittle them down into a simpler version so that they can make sure that they are able to release the film on time. Also, there's another thing called the director's vision or the director's discretion. I like this a lot because when you are actually in the seat of the director making a lot of these decisions, you have ideas that maybe others don't. It's one thing to read something on the page, but to actually be on set with your actors, you get new ideas. You get different takes on how to approach a scene. Some movies really benefit from being rewritten on set. One example is Rogue One, Gareth Edwards' Star Wars film. Number one, the ending was completely overhauled. It was changed and it worked for the better. In early versions of the script, Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor actually survive. In the original third act, they actually escaped the Death Star, but getting off the planet alive, that was in the script originally. Once they started shooting the movie, they rewrote it with a new ending where everyone, sorry for spoilers if you haven't seen it, but everyone dies in the final sacrifice. That gave the movie a much more powerful emotional payoff, and it made it feel like more of a true war story. Now, not all movies are that lucky, though. Some movies are rewritten during production, and they're a lot worse off. One example that I can think of is The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. I really wanted to like this movie. I liked everything going into it. I really liked the idea of a dark universe where Universal was trying to create this shared cinematic universe with all of its infamous movie monsters. What I don't like, or didn't like back then, was how they were going to try to reinvent all of them for a more modern sensibility. I really think that they should have just stuck to the old 1930s, you know, gothic inspired versions of the characters and creating essentially a very large period piece with all of their movie monsters. But anyway, I digress. The script was reportedly rushed and it was rewritten multiple times during the production. Now, Tom Cruise, he pushed for changes that tried to emphasize his character a little more and reshaped a lot of scenes while he was on set. And the tone of the movie during the production changed and went back and forth. Sometimes it was horror, sometimes it was part comedy, sometimes it was part franchise setup, and it never really committed to any one genre. Another movie that was maligned from rewrites, Fantastic Four, the 2015 version, and the director was very famously button heads with the studio over what the movie should have been. That movie feels very disjointed when you watch it today. Another thing I don't like about that film is it doesn't give enough time to Reed Richards, who is the face of Fantastic Four. His story, I think the movie is mostly Reed Richards' story. And there are a lot of moments that are just not in the film that show his character developing. I like that he becomes a coward right after the initial accident in the fifth dimension or whatever it was. And he's scared. He runs away. Well, meanwhile, the rest of the team gets kind of like repurposed to become crime fighters. He's more a fugitive on the run. Not until he comes back and faces his demons and faces his own mistakes, takes responsibility for the horrors that happened to his friends. You know, that is a really strong movie right there. I really wish that we could have explored that more instead of getting what we got, because the movie is so chopped. I mean, the movie's only an hour and 40 minutes. That's ridiculous. When you have a movie that's trying to establish that much, and when you have that much meat for drama, the movie should be a strong 2 hour and 10-minute film. If they'd have focused on Reed Richards and all the pathos, we could have got a much, much better film. I think that movie's biggest problem is not the tone, not the kind of reimagining or the modern take on the characters. It's just a lack of commitment to one direction. If they'd have let him just do what he wanted, not everybody would have liked it, but it would have been a much stronger movie in the end. Another set of movies that were rewritten on set but really benefited from it were the two initial sequels to Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End. Now, the reason why is because after the huge success of Curse of the Black Pearl, Disney really wanted to fast track the sequels, to get those out as quick as possible. So a lot of things were kind of just being made up as they went along, including things like Davy Jones, the God of Calypso, the climax to the trilogy, which was the giant maelstrom set piece at the end of That World. And all that stuff, a lot of it was kind of being made up on the fly and written as such. If you go back to Dead Man's Chest, there is a lot of improvisational energy in scenes with Johnny Depp, Orlando Bloom, and the actor that plays Norrington. I'm sorry, I forget his name right now. But so many of their scenes were improvised because the script was constantly being written and rewritten every day. When you get to At World's End, you can kind of feel the movie suffers a little more because of the rewrites. The plot of the movie is very dense. It's full of different character arcs, motivations, climaxes, and a lot of people could say it's very convoluted too, or even hard to follow. Now, I love both of these movies to death. And I attribute that a lot to the director, Gore Verbinski. Despite how chaotic the soup was, he made a lot of sense out of it. And when you go back and watch At World's End, if you watch it multiple times, as I have, it gets better and better because you're able to actually connect a lot of the plot points or the character threads much more than you can in just one sitting. You have characters like Jack Sparrow that are going from a selfish trickster to someone who's going to make a ultimate sacrifice, a true sacrifice, although he's doing it very reluctantly. Very, very powerful theme. Also the idea of wanting to live forever and the drawbacks to that. There's a lot of internal conflict in him. Great, great moment for his character. Also, Will Turner from, this idealistic kind of blacksmith to a self-sacrificing hero to take the place of Davy Jones, and that being the only way that he can survive this whole ordeal is very, very powerful too. Elizabeth Swann goes from being a governor's daughter to a pirate king and a warlord. Davy Jones goes from a heartless villain to a tragic, misunderstood figure. Tia Dalma going from a mysterious witch to a all-encompassing sea goddess Calypso. And then also there are other themes of death to the old world by industrialization. There's a lot of ways you can read into the conflict of At World's End that I really love. The pirate era represents like freedom and mythology, especially where it's represented by Calypso. The kind of romanticized version of the world, right? And that's being threatened by the East India Trading Company, which represents order and bureaucracy and ruthless capitalism and, the rise of trade and industrialism and contracts and guns and all that stuff. Davy Jones, too, being a very mythological figure at the heart of this, he becomes enslaved by corporate interests when they're able to, capture the heart of Davy Jones, and then they've got him held captive. I love Calypso because she is the embodiment of untamable nature, but she's betrayed and bound by mankind, which is very much like how mankind has turned its back on mythology. I mean, we can talk about religion and faith and things like that, but in a lot of our day-to-day lives, we don't attribute much to spirituality. We could, though. The gods of old, they haven't died. We've just forgotten about them. So in a lot of ways, the conflict in that film very much reflects how mankind has gone about reshaping the world to our interests. There's so many different ways you can read into the mythology of At World's End. If you haven't seen the movie, or if you have seen it, go back and please appreciate some of these things, because Gore Verbinski made an awesome epic in a very fun kind of Western way. I really, really love that movie. So, not to get too off track, but that is a movie or a set of movies that really benefited from being rewritten during production. So anyways, guys, Marvel is up to their old tricks. They are rewriting the script even as they are filming Avengers Doomsday. And you tell me, is this good? Is it bad? Could it help the movie? Could it make it worse? Tell me down below in the comments, and please remember to like and subscribe on your way out. I will see you in the next one.